Hello and welcome back to the Chris Ott channel, and we're beginning part 2 of this series, which I'm titling On Cause, which is about causes and causation. Last time I talked about just the words that are going to come up and how they're defined in this series, and we covered about maybe 20 words. And in this talk, we're going to get right into the topic. The first thing we're going to talk about is cause itself. I want people to get more aware of the issues surrounding causation, okay? Because that's the main topic of this series. And but before we get really deeply into our solution to these problems, we're first going to talk about several major themes of thought so that people know more about them before we go forward. It's necessary. Looking back, you'll see it was necessary. Next week, we're going to talk about knowledge and what's comprised by that subject and the issues that surround what we know or can know and how we can know them. Anyway, this talk again is about cause itself, cause. Now, cause is a term we use all the time, and we sort of have an intuitive relationship with causes. We think in terms of causes. When we come into a room and we see things have changed, we think about what caused that, or any change. We understand change in terms of causes, okay? We also, it's intuitive that we feel throughout history. I mean, you're born like this. We feel that everything has a cause, okay? It doesn't seem like anything could be that didn't have some kind of cause of some sort. Now, that's an important intuition, and it's been discussed throughout the history of philosophy. And it pertains to religion and science and everything. So it's very profound. But here, we're going to point out how causes, what stands as the cause of something is much deeper than it first seems. Okay, first of all, there are two issues, and I have to cover both of these. The first one is to address the notion that's very common to our thinking, the notion that there are chains of causes or series of causes. So while some change we observe, we assume is caused by such, we assume, well, that had to be caused by something else, and then that had to be caused by something else, and then so on and so forth. Now, when we're talking about cause in the strongest sense, okay, we mean that which is truly responsible for something occurring or existing, and not just something that came before it that had that outcome, but that which actually began the whole chain process of events that led to it. For instance, if a person is murdered and there's a murder trial and they find out that the shooter was actually a hired assassin, and that the guy's wife hired a hitman, and then we're going to prosecute the spouse that hired the hitman, because we're going to go back to the real cause. Of course, there's some reason that the spouse hired the hitman. So if we're really looking for the cause of the death, we got to go back to find out what caused that, because ultimately we want to know what is truly responsible for this outcome. Since that's virtually impossible, because it ends up in kind of an infinite regress, going back, that we settle for something less than that. But when we're talking about causation in the strongest sense, we mean that which is fundamentally and absolutely and responsible for the outcome, even if there were many things that were set in motion. For instance, if we have a set of dominoes and we push one domino, the final domino will fall, but we wouldn't say it fell because of the domino right before it. We'd probably say, well, it fell because of the guy that pushed the first domino. But then we, of course, have to find out, why did he push the domino? Okay, so we can express this idea in terms of a chain, okay? So let's say that I have this chain and I'm pulling along some object, okay? Now, we wouldn't normally say that this link in the chain caused, you could say, why did the object move? Well, because it was pulled by this link of the chain. And this moved because it was pulled by this link of the chain, and so forth, and I think you get the idea. But ultimately, we have me pulling the whole chain, and then ultimately we have to ask, well, what's causing me to pull this chain? And of course, that's because I'm trying to express something about causation, and it's motivating me to take action. But then you have to ask, well, what's causing me to want to express something about causation? And that's a long, long story. Okay, and then actually, if you really followed that story back, you'd find yourself in the beginning of time when people first began to think about causation, and then, it just doesn't really have an end. Now, so that's the subject of causal chains. But if the first event that initiated, if there is one, okay, that's truly responsible for the whole chain of events, then that truly is the cause, okay, of everything. Let's say, I want people to see that there's not just these linear chains like this. That's not how cause works. It's more like an octopus. So let me give you an idea of that. Matter of fact, it will help if I pull up my book, I think. Let's see if I can do that. Let's say that we're in a morgue. We go in a morgue and there's a body on the gurney, and we want to know what the cause of death is. Okay. I should have had this ready, but there's so much to think about before I start that it's harder than it seems. Oh gosh. Oh gosh. Okay, so let's say there's a detective there, and the detective finds a bullet, and then he decides, well, the cause of death was it was a murder, and so some killer is responsible for this event. That's the cause of death, murder, a gunshot. And so they go looking for that shooter. And then, of course, when they try him, they look into not just whether he shot him, but what caused him to shoot him, et cetera, et cetera. Because as I said, he could be a hired assassin. But let's say there was also in that room, there was the coroner. And the coroner doesn't say, well, the bullet caused him to die. He says, well, it was this tear in the heart artery, that caused, led to the death. And then he will go through a series of how the body works and what causes the death and the heart to stop, okay? And if there's a social worker there, they might go, well, there's all these shootings and killing, and that's due to social evil, and the cause of that is, political, and the cause of that is, and so that becomes a chain. And so, and if we psychoanalyze the killer, well, we're going to have to go back, follow a psychological chain, but we might instead follow a genetic chain. So what we'll find is that all kinds of lines of causations, or what we might call causal chains, are all leading to this one death. And it's not just like all going back to, and there, we're moving toward the cause. You got to follow all these dimensions, okay? Now, remember that we're looking for that one, if it exists, truly responsible event that led to all those chains, to all the outcomes everywhere. Imagine how complicated those threads are. If you really sat and thought a long time about any one of these chains of causes, okay, you would actually find that they lead backward, and where they terminate is laws. Okay, so what I mean is, if I'm discussing the bullet that killed the man, I'm going to trace that back physically to the laws of physics that around an explosive device and how that creates inertia and all that, and the physical laws that are involved in the penetration and everything. And those laws of nature, okay, is kind of where you stop. And now there's another set of laws that you'll also terminate. If you followed the why did he do this and why did he why did that happen? Why did that happen? By the human element that leads to outcomes, we would come to laws of human nature, laws that govern human nature. Now, in both cases, the laws of nature and the laws of human nature, no one knows what caused those. I mean, you can say, oh, they were caused by the Big Bang, or they were caused by evolutionary selection or something. But if you look deeply into it, you'll find that that is a nominal cause. You're just naming something that caused it. You're not really explaining how it caused it. Okay, so let's say let's take gravity. If I ask why this book, moves toward the table when I let it go, what's the cause? I mean, one person could say, well, what caused it to move toward the table is that you let it go. That was the cause. Well, and then you follow the reason I let it go. But physically, we would say, well, the law of gravity made it fall, okay? But the law of gravity is only, first of all, it's mathematical description of what happens when I let things like books go near the surface of the earth. It's a description. It's not actually an explanation of why, of what makes it fall. For instance, when I let this go, all right, the book obeyed the law of gravity, but what made it obey it? I mean, does the book know the law? Or if say if the gravity, made it, how does the gravity control it? I mean, no one knows. No one has ever detected anything called gravity. It's not like electricity or something like that you detect. It's just the name of the regular event, okay? So when we trace back these chains, we find that the best we can do is inevitably we're going to stop at laws, and we have no cause for the laws. I want to point something out. It's important. These days it's popular to say the Big Bang. The Big Bang is where everything came from. That's how we got everything from nothing. But if you read and you begin to follow the description of the event of the Big Bang, there's all kinds of stuff there before the Big Bang. For instance, the Big Bang operates by the laws of nature. It's a function of the laws of nature. That's the expansion and all of that. And so where did the laws of nature come from that they're operating by, that it's a function of? And we assume, at least we visualize, that it happens in a kind of space at a particular moment in time. Well, where did the time and the space come from? Some say it came from those came from the Bang itself. They go, well, the time, space, and the laws of nature, they all expanded out too. That doesn't actually make sense, because then the event never really happened, because there never was a moment when it happened, and there never was a place where it happened, because before it happened there was no place and there was no time. Sorry if I'm speaking quickly. I've gone over that before a couple of times in the past in talks, so I'm not going to worry about it. But these are questions that we don't have answered. Is where do things come from? What caused things? Now, I also want to say that if there is a first cause of some sort, and all chains come from that first event, okay, somehow, as a long process of that follows the sort of the laws of cause and effect, then that first event is the only cause in the strong sense of that which is responsible for everything. And therefore, to talk about chains of causes is not right, because if there is only one cause in the strong sense of cause, the absolutely, truly the cause, then all that came after it and because of it were effects. And so when you come to the morgue, you're really seeing the final effect of a long series of effects, of a long chain of effects from some unknown original cause. And that's true of everything. And the story's not over when you go into the morgue. The story will continue, because there are, of course, going to be big effects of the murder. You know, the family, the finances, the trial, you know, the detective's going to get a paycheck. All these things. Okay. Now, so what I meant to convey is that if you think about it, just the preceding event in a series of events that may be connected isn't the true cause if it was caused, if it has a cause. Ultimately, it's all caused, it's all effects, and it's all caused by something, okay, that's original. Okay. Now I'm going to start. Now there's another aspect I wanted to discuss, and that is the nominal cause. Okay. You know, the Bible begins with the book of Genesis. That's the beginning of the Old Testament. And the first words of the Bible, this is the Bible, it's my Bible. The first words are, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Okay? So, where did all this come from? God. Okay? That's what it says. But did we really learn something? Okay? Because if we were to ask, well, how did God create it? Well, Genesis is silent on that. So, do we understand the cause? No, we only have the name of it, God. Now, if we look up the word God, it means the Creator. So by definition, of course, whatever is the Creator created everything. But that's not really saying anything. I mean, obviously, the world was created by the Creator. But we can't find this Creator, and we don't know how he did this creating. So nominal means in name only. To say God created the world only is it's only giving a name to that which is supposed to be its cause. Very often, the cause is purely theoretical, and it's just, even what it is not known. Nobody really knows what we're talking about when we talk about God, except that it's the creator, and it did the creating. But this doesn't tell us anything. I mean, whatever created the world, of course, was the creator. So I guess we should call it God. This doesn't really inform us. Now, for a very long time, people were okay with that. Because if you weren't, the world wasn't really set up for you. So people had faith. But that was kind of like a substitute for asking anything interesting about cause. Okay. Now, people might think science. I often think science now is just so far beyond that. We don't use just nominal causes, just in name only. Yes, we do. Science does too. For instance, when we say the cause of this book, moving toward the Earth at a particular speed, and that can be determined if we know all the variables of the density of the object, density of the Earth, distance. That description is called gravity, and science will say gravity. But the definition of gravity is whatever the hell made it do that, okay? It does. I mean, you could say gravity is just the description of what happens all the time when you drop books, but it's not. It really it means that which made it do that. But science can't say where gravity comes from or how it makes books fall. So how's that different than talking about God? It's just a nominal cause. Now let's go back now in history, and we're going to see that this kind of thinking has always been here. This is how we've thought, always, all the way back. As far as we can guess from what we can read and pictures and pictographs on cave walls, what little we know in bones, it looks like this is how people thought. People, early man, they're around a fire, they have some language. They're not apes anymore, they're sitting around a fire and they're cooking and it's night and they're telling stories. And then somebody, an elderly shaman or witch doctor or chief, or kind of like a proto-priest, he tells the people, or the children, where did everything come from? Where did the rivers come from? And then he makes it up. And he says, well, Brother Bear made the rivers and he carved them in the first days, And he tells the story and he creates either an animal spirit or they gradually become human spirits, and we called them gradually gods. And then that sort of got consolidated into just one. But it's always been that confronted with the question of cause, where'd something come from? How do we account for it? What's responsible for it being there? We invent something with our imagination based on things we find around us. It's like them, but it's not. And then we give it a name and we call it the cause. And nothing more to it. I don't know how many people, but in the myth by Plato in the Republic, the myth of Atlantis goes, Poseidon created Atlantis. Well, how? Actually, there isn't even an Atlantis. He made that up too. But anyway, things are created by the gods. Things are created by the animal spirits, etc. And these are just, they're stories and they're nominal causes. I hope people can get that, okay? All right. So the first thing that I went over was that we're looking for that first really, truly, ultimately responsible event or thing or something that is ultimately responsible for all this being here. everything out of nothing. Okay, that's the first thing I conveyed. And that all these causal chains that we can follow, they're really called effects chains. They're chains of effects, if you think about it. Everything that happens is an effect of something else. And then the other thing, as I said, we've never dealt with actual cause in its other strong sense, which means explaining. I mean, if I say that's caused by, Kuchschnack, well, I could tell you all about Kuchschnack that I just made up, but I mean, if I can't tell you how it caused it, I haven't really told you what the cause is. I just postponed the problem. Okay. Okay. So, how did we get something out of nothing? No one really knows. If anyone thinks that scientists know, there's a reason that they think that, which I'm going to talk about in just a second. Where did the laws of nature come from, and what are they? What are those laws? How'd they get here? How do they govern? How do they do that? Nobody knows. And if you think science knows, there's a reason that you think that, as I just said, and we're going to get to it. How is perception, even just regular eyesight, if you followed my last talks, perception is a more general term as we're using it. It means, taking experience of anything, even thoughts and dreams. But even just like eyesight, which is the most colloquial sense of perceiving something, how do I perceive that object? You can tell me a long, long story about eyeballs, but it wasn't the question I asked. That's describing things that are perceived in a laboratory, under a microscope, or, spreading it out. But I asked how you perceive. You're telling me about eyeballs, and you're telling me things that eyeballs do and brains do, but I'm talking about how do we perceive the eyeballs and how do we perceive the brain. I wasn't asking the content of the experience. I already know that, or it's easy to find out. I'm asking, how do I perceive through my eyes? Okay? No one actually knows that. And that's called the mind-body problem. And there isn't a philosopher or a scientist that doesn't deny that it's unsolved. So I'm not making this up. Nobody knows. Okay? So what's the cause of our ability to perceive? I mean, isn't everything kind of reducible to that? Isn't that how we know everything? Well, how's it possible? I mean, if we don't know that, we're in real serious trouble, and we are. The world is in basically a darkness that it's always been in. I mean, it's always had this, no one's ever been able to answer that question. Nobody even proposed an answer. I will, but this is a big moment, okay? Now, now, I am going to propose answers to these. Oh, I wanted to say, why we all go, well, science must know. It's kind of a general assumption that most people have, That's why we kind of don't worry about these kinds of questions, like, scientists know, or, Well, it's called scientism, and it's a thing that, in fact, affects all society, and in all countries, in China, and India, scientism. It's the belief that philosophy is bunk, religion is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really, usually religion is bunk too. And that the only really appropriate way, a method to determine any kind of truth is the scientific method, and science is has the only sort of like, it kind of has monopoly on truth and all questions and the method to answer them. That's an idea that was created in the 20th century. It didn't exist before the 20th century at all, in any form. That didn't exist. But in the 20th century, there were certain movements in, ironically, philosophy, which came to the idea that philosophy is obsolete and that science is the way. It's the way that's truth, or the whole question of truth and answering questions is the purview of science. Only. Nobody else. We don't have any right to even think. That's scientism, truly. Now, it was brought about by a series of movements, and one of them was logical positivism and behaviorism. But we don't need to go into those. I have in the past, like twice, so we don't need to. But there's a reason that we all kind of buy into that. It's not true. Even the logical positivists realized that it wasn't true. By the time they fizzled out. But it's kind of just a naive narrative that prevails. But we're going to find out next talk. We're going to talk about truth and how we determine truth, and then we're going to see why science does not have this purview that is claimed by scientism. Okay, so you won't fully understand what I just said till next week, but you will. Now, there's much more we can say about causation. There's a lot more. But I think I've said enough for today. We're about 35 minutes into this. And I think that I've said a lot. And people can just take some time and think about those things. Next week, we're going to talk about knowledge. And it's much like today we talked about just cause and what we mean by cause and some of the issues related to cause. And then we'll talk about knowledge. And after that, we'll be able to start getting into the meat of things. But we need to have some introduction into these subjects. It's amazing people don't get taught these. All right. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time. Take care.